Hi, BookTube. Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie. So I decided to do a favorites video after all. I know I just did the, like how my reading is going so far. But, whenever I watch other people talk about theirs on YouTube, I kind of get tempted to do my own versions of those types of videos. So, yes, I was influenced and decided to do one after all. So here are my favorite books so far of 2026. They're in no order or anything. I just, I stack them on my. So first is my first Shakespeare play of the year, and I keep saying I'm going to read The Tempest this summer, so I have August, and then after August, it's not summer anymore. Not that I have to read it within that time, but I always have a bad habit of saying that I'm gonna read something within a time frame, and I don't do it. So I'm definitely gonna try to get myself to do it. Persuade myself to pick up The Tempest. But anyway, so this is Macbeth, the infamous Scottish play that's cursed, and I actually recently rewatched the Disney Channel show So Weird. It's not on anymore. It got canceled. It only had 3 seasons. And I did watch a video talking about how that show was on a time when things weren't like Disney didn't know where they wanted to go with their shows. So, but it's like a show about this girl who she's really into the paranormal, and there's an episode where her aunt is they're visiting her aunt, and they're a family that travels because the mom is a singer. So they're on a tour bus, and they're constantly traveling the road, and they go visit her aunt who is in a play in Macbeth. And the episode is she actually releases a dragon that's on the cover of a spell book, a real spell book. So that's the whole episode. Her and her cousins are having to deal with getting this dragon back into the book. So at this time they're doing the play Macbeth, and that's kind of reminded me. Oh, right, I forgot about But this one was really it was so much fun to read, to actually read the play. I knew a little bit about him. I've seen bits and pieces on TV shows where the characters do the play, like that So Weird episode. Like there's an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode where they're doing the play Macbeth. But in case by chance you don't know, this is a story about this guy Macbeth. He is a duke working for this King MacDougal, I think the king's name is. And there was a war in the beginning of the play with someone who was a traitor to them. And while they're celebrating, these witches approach him and another friend of his. Maybe it's Macduff. And these three witches tell them this prophecy that Macbeth will become king, and Macduff's kids will become king after him. And they both at first dismiss the prophecy, think it's silly, but then Macbeth tells his wife, who takes it very seriously, and they plot to kill the king, to make the prophecy come true. And in doing so, they end up feeling the guilt of betraying the king weighs on them, pretty much. They end up both having nightmares about it. This play is so dark. There's a lot of people dying and there's a lot of death, and it's just, there's so many dramatic moments, especially moments when their guilty conscience gets to them, and it's so intriguing, and just this guy, he's one of those people that's he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks, and tells himself, one of those people who will tell themselves that, oh, I'm not the villain here. I just did what was, what I was told. Like, I'm just the hand that does the, I'm not the one, I'm not the true villain here. He's that kind of person who doesn't acknowledge his own guilt, his own desire, his own desire to do this villainous thing. And it's just such, it was so engaging and so much fun to read this play. And I always say when I read these, whether it's a Shakespeare play or a classic book where like I get finally find out where those infamous lines come from. Like I'm listening to a new podcast made by Book Riot where they talk about the classical books that you might or might not have read, and if you haven't read, they're trying to inspire you to read it, or at least to tell you about it so you can know why it's important, why it's relevant. Although it's not, they also do like modern books that aren't officially classics yet. Like I'm gonna listen to an episode on The Secret History by Donna Tartt. They did an episode on Twilight. Yes, the Twilight. I think it's because they also want to look at books that have been essentially a pop culture phenomenon, and despite people's prejudice against Twilight and just criticism of it, it was still a popular book. It was still a phenomenon. I mean, people still talk about it today, whether it's for the negative or the positive. But anyway, and they were talking about I've listened to their episodes on 1984. I don't know if I've heard their episode on Macbeth or not. I don't think I have. I think I've only heard them do Shakespeare. And just like that was another one of those books where you hear there's these, it outlives its original source material because there's so many words, so many bits of dialogue and phrases in that book, and just general words that have become part of pop culture. Like, I mean, Big Brother is the name of a reality show, and that came from 1984. And I don't know off the top of my head what from Macbeth, quotes from Macbeth are part of the pop culture phenomenon. But yeah, it is always so cool when you finally, get those quotes when you read stuff like this. Anyway, so Macbeth is a favorite this year. And like I said, I'm going to read The Tempest, I'm hoping. And then we have, this one is one I had not heard about until I looked up, until I started looking up Asian literature. And, like any other website on Thrift Books, if I look for books on Thrift Books to buy in the future, then it will start, since I'm a member, it will start recommending me books that seem like whatever I bought previously from Thrift Books. And this was one of the books that they recommended. This is a quartet. I don't know how to say the author's name. Pramodier Inata Toor. Forgive me for my bad pronunciation. But the book is called The Earth of Mankind. This Earth of Mankind. So this book, this guy is Mink is a Japanese student. This is during the time when Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch. So there's a lot of different types of groups, different types of classes. And our main character, Mink, is a Japanese student, and he's one of the only ones in this particular school. Like, he got on there on scholarship. So one of his buddies at the school tells him about this woman he's gonna meet, and that she has this really beautiful daughter that could be just Mink's type, because Mink hasn't found any girl that he likes, any girl that's interesting enough for him. So he gets invited to this guy's house, and this is a rich nobleman's house, and he meets the girl, and she's very quiet, very reserved, a little submissive, very submissive, and her and Mink are immediately drawn to each other and are interested, and it's kind of love at first sight. And then he meets her mom, And the mom is completely taken with him and is really interested in him too. So she starts matchmaking. And come to find out, the mom really wants them together because she wants her daughter out of this house because the father is not a great guy. He's an asshole. So Mink starts spending time with this family and really get to know the mother and the daughter. But unfortunately, her half-brother, the son of the woman, and her mom's a concubine, was a concubine of this rich guy. That's how she ended up with him. And her son, and the boy that is the son. I think he's the girl's only her half brother or stepbrother or something. He doesn't like Mink coming in on his. He sees Mink coming in on his territory. He doesn't like it. He does not like it. So he tries to frame Mink for a crime, which it's really easy to do because Mink is Japanese. So that's a bit lower of a lower class. So this book explores colonialism and the colonization of Indonesia, and it does what a lot of books about colonization, where it really looks at the consequences of that and how it divides people, and all because you're from another part of the world, or you're not the people. You're not like the people that colonize. You're the natives, and you need to be educated. And Mink is a very educated. He went to school. He has got a privileged situation, but he feels mixed feelings on the situation because he feels disloyal to his mother's people. But he also kind of likes the cushiness of the life with that woman, with the girl, he's the girlfriend, and her mom. He's really enjoying it, but he has to contend with the jealous brother who feels like Mink is coming, like I said, he's invading his territory, and that his life is in danger because of the brother is, he has a temperament, he's temperamental. And the only thing I didn't love about this book is the romance, and it felt very the way Mink sometimes, he loved her, the girl, but he also did not treat her that all the time. He would say things that I didn't really like. But, I mean, this is a different time, of course, so. But this was, such a page turner. It's a bit slow moving story, not a lot of action is happening. It's just Mink spending time with this family, this mother and daughter, interacting with them. And I felt so bad for the daughter because she was so she's very dependent on her mother, and then she became kind of dependent on Mink too, and it's heartbreaking. Even though I don't always like how he reacted towards her, some of the things he would say to her, there was definitely love between them, and this girl needed to, and I wanted the daughter to break free and maybe being with Mink was the first step to doing that, to gain some freedom, or at least that's how her mother saw it. And out of the female characters, I loved her mom more. She was awesome. She was so badass and so very smart and very very fierce, and a woman that, she really stood up for herself when she could, and, found ways to rebel quietly, I feel like. Anyway, I have not read books 2, 3, and 4 yet, but I want to at some point. But yeah, this was really good, and I hope people check this book out, especially if you're interested in colonization. Which I did not realize that I mean, in school we always talk about the English settlers coming to America, and what they did to the natives and the Native Americans, but I feel like there's so many other parts of the world that were colonized, and of course we hear about World War II and Hitler and his actions, which in a way that's a colonization in its own country. But you don't hear about these other countries. Like I said, the country where my grandmother came from was colonized by Spain, and then America comes and kind of takes over. And then, and I actually got a nonfiction book that talks about how many, America's complicated relationship with the Philippines. And apparently it was a very long relationship. Like, I just thought that they came during World War II, but they've been around. America has been involved in the Philippines for quite a while, I feel like. Okay, then this next one is a reread. And that is A Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in a trilogy, so it's going to be hard to talk about. So I'll give you a description of the first book. I mean, although I'm sure a lot of fantasy readers have probably already read this trilogy. And in fact, the whole Realm of the Elderling series. And, I mean, in fact, my friend Larissa's reading it as we speak because I told her about it and told her she should check it out. I think she would like it. And she's liking it so far. So the first book is about this boy. When we first meet him, he's 6 years old. And he is the bastard son of the king in waiting, Prince Chivalry. And Chivalry, and he is pretty much, and Chivalry kind of abandons Kid because he feels and abdicates the throne because he feels such shame about getting, his girlfriend pregnant, and for, layman's terms, and kind of, goes off on his own somewhere, like abandons the kingdom of Farseer. And so he is fostered with the stable hand of the kingdom, Burrich. But then the king notices Fitz, the boy's name, they call him Fitz, and decides to as he gets a little bit older, he takes on Fitz as his assassin trade. He apprentices him to his assassin. And it's about Fitz growing up in the palace and learning how to be an assassin, and how he doesn't like the idea of killing and just trying to live this complex life. He, tries to has friends, including this girl, I can't remember the nickname because she's called something different in the first book, but her actual name is Molly. And it's about him growing up and trying to live his life, and how he's burdened with being a bastard. Like, his father's half brother doesn't like him and sees Fitz as a threat. And then you have Fitz also, because he is a bastard. He has the ability that all members of the Farseer family have, which is the ability to read people's minds. It's called the skill. He can, read their minds and also get into your head and mess with and make you think certain things. But Fitz also has another magical power. He has what is known as the wit, which it's the ability to communicate and bond with animals, get inside their minds. So it's similar to the skill, but with animals. But the wit is pretty much feared by everyone because you have the potential to become more beast than man. And even the same Burrich tries to, force it out of Fitz because he knows that the wit can be potentially dangerous. And this is the second book where everything, picks up, where the first book picked up. The Chivalry's other brother is going to be the new king in waiting, because of course Chivalry abdicated the throne in the first book. And Fitz is I would say a preteen in this book, and it's about this burden of being the king's assassin and being loyal to the king, but also wanting to live his own life. Him and Molly strike up a romantic relationship, or they try to, but it gets messy. And him trying to, help. Verity has to choose a wife in this book, and having a future queen, and Fitz having help with that, and help her adapt to this environment because she's from a different kingdom where she is which they have a different culture. Her kingdom has a different culture than this one. And it's just him once getting older and more mature, but still being kind of caught between still being a child, the maturity of a child, but also, realizing some adult a lot of adult things and having these responsibilities, this burden, and how scary and hard it is, and worrying about the king's half brother, and his father's half brother becomes even more of a threat because he actually takes Fitz seriously and wants to try to get rid of him, and he wants to be the one on the throne, and it's just, it's such a, the book, it's hard to find the perfect adjective for this book, and I got frustrated with Fitz. I still like his character. I know that not everybody likes his character. And I'm assuming that by this book, people really don't like him because he's a really emotional teenager now at this point and making dumb decisions. But it's, I think the character is very well written by Robin Hobb. She is so great at characters. It makes me think of Stephen King with his characters. It's one of the many things Stephen King does really well. Robin Hobb also does brilliantly. It just, you love and hate the characters, and you get frustrated with them, but you also root for them, and it's just, these books are so, even if Fitz can be annoying, they're still very compelling. I always want to find out what happens next, and it reads, even though this one is long, it still reads pretty quickly. And I'm having such a good time. And I love that my friend Larissa's reading these books too. I mean, I wish I could get my other friend Terry to read them, but it's probably not, I don't think it's her type of fantasy book. Especially when and it's, I was so excited to be able to talk to them. And there's so many things, because like I said, this is a reread, but there's so many things I forgot. So I've said this before, that it feels like I'm reading for the first time. Even though, it's one of these things where is all coming back to me. Also, the Fitz and Molly drama, that's one of the things I remember being incredibly frustrated with and annoyed, because both of them are idiots. Both of them are very immature idiots. And I don't think it's just a Fitz problem. I think it's a Molly problem, too. She demands so much of him, but she's also ignorant of his life. He can't tell her things, and when he finally does try to tell her, even though he shouldn't, she doesn't believe him. And it's just, they are so frustrating. I almost wish they had never been together. I mean, I had hope for them because they were cute in the beginning, but after a while, it's like they're not going to work. So that's one of the things that frustrated me, that whole drama. But it's just, and seeing, and Fitz is the whole thing with Regal and everything, and the half brother wanting the throne, and the threat of him was so intense, and his relationship with Shade, his assassin master, and Burge was once again even more like messy and complicated and beautiful at the same time. They both care about Fitz and see him as a son, and it's I love this trilogy. It's such a great fantasy trilogy. And I have read the first. I'm almost done. I have one more book, Assassin's Quest, and then I can get back to. Although I'm tempted to, before I get to Assassin's Quest, read the next Live Shift Traders book, because to me it's a summer read, because it takes place on a ship mostly, so it feels very summery to me. But yeah, this was so good, and I can't wait to reread book 3. So then we have Alison Weir's take on the Six Tudor Queens. This is the book 2 in her Six Tudor Queens series about Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, the King's Obsession. This is Alison Weir. In case I didn't say the author's name, Alison Weir. So most people probably know the story of Anne, have a basic idea of Anne. She was the second wife of Henry because, Catherine of Aragon didn't give him an heir, and she was much older than him, so she was, getting older, and Anne came along and seduced him a little bit. She was like, because her family wanted power. And so she seduced King Henry and married him. But sadly, like Catherine of Aragon, she could not give him an heir. But she is the mother of Queen Elizabeth, future Queen Elizabeth. So Anne, it was such a, she's very charming and charismatic. She was, and she's very, I feel like she's a lot, her temperament is similar to King Henry's. Like, they both have volatile tempers, and, it was so, interesting to read. And there are, of course, things I didn't like. I had, we got to see her time in the French court, and how she learned some ways of womanly wiles, and how she was a woman that was a little bit trying to be ahead of her time. Like, I mean, she was still of her time at the same time. She still had her religious beliefs and still tried to be a good, noble lady, but she was also ambitious. And it was really fun to read another take on Anne in her love story with Henry. And just like Catherine of Aragon, the love story was there at first in the beginning. There was love, but Alison Weir also takes an interesting look at maybe debating if Anne really loved Henry. And it wasn't at like the show The Tudors on Showtime. There was clearly there was some romance there, but in this one Weir frames it as maybe there wasn't as much, like she didn't love him at first. She was only doing it because she had to, and then eventually she grows to love him. And I really enjoyed Anne's perspective and getting her story and getting, I mean, it had been a long time since I watched The Other Bowling Girl, which was based on the Philippa Gregory novel. So, I didn't remember everything except for who played Anne, which is, what is her name? I can't remember the actress. Natalie Portman played Anne in the adaptation of that book. And then Natalie Dormer plays in the Tudor show. And it's interesting, they always cast her as a brunette, but I feel like we don't technically know what her hair color was. Like, it's so hard when the farther back in history you go, the less chance of knowing exactly what a person looked like. But she is described as not glamorous. Like, I think her sister Jane was considered the pretty one. But she's, as a woman, she's so, she makes up for her not being as beautiful as her sister by, being clever and witty and knowing how to seduce a man. It kind of makes me think of Elizabeth Bennet, where Elizabeth is not as pretty, like Jane, her sister Jane is considered the pretty one, but Elizabeth is very witty and clever, and she's very sassy and very smart. And I feel like it's the same with Anne. Like, she's very smart and makes up for her lack of looks. But I enjoyed reading. Like, I definitely enjoyed this one more than the third book, which I read as well this year. Now, I don't have my copy anymore because I bought a hardback because for some reason the third book's hardback was cheaper. But I try to stick mostly to paperbacks because unless it's a really thin book where it's, really short, then maybe I might get a hardback version. There are times, and of course there are also times when I've gotten books that just came out because I really want to read them, so I buy the hardback. Especially if I get it at somewhere where it's gonna be cheap, like Walmart or somewhere. But anyway, I loved reading this book. Like I said, I loved it more than the Jane Seymour story. Although I like the Jane Seymour story, and then I will be reading at some point soon. I will be reading the next book, which is about Anne of Cleves. But this was so much fun. Okay, and then we have, so this was one of the first books I read it. I counted it as 3 different books, but it originally was meant to be, or at least the author wanted it to be, one big book, but then it became a trilogy. And that is The Lord of the Rings. And I finally physically read. I'm listening to it on an audiobook, and I've watched my copy of the DVDs of the adaptation, but I had never physically read the book. And I had read The Hobbit, and I should have brought the Silmarillion because I love the Silmarillion too. But it was so much fun to read this physically. I loved it. Pippin is my favorite Hobbit, and there was so, and I still, just like in the movie, I love the Legolas dynamic. And it was so cool that the whole counting of their kills was in the book, which I guess maybe that's, maybe that's what you do to make it easier on yourself to, do in war. I don't know. I don't know where Tolkien got that from, but anyway, it was so cool and it was so great. This, if by chance, if you don't pay attention to pop culture, don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, this is about like this magic ring who has the power and to harm people and take over and stuff. And the ring belonged to this evil sorcerer or whatever, and they thought he was dead, but his spirit comes back. And because the ring is founded by a hobbit, and then this hobbit ends up giving it to his nephew, and that's Frodo, our main character. And Frodo has to go on a quest to destroy this ring. And he brings a group of companions, his 3 hobbit friends, his gardener and his cousins. His gardener, Samwise Gamgee, and who kind of takes on the role of a servant to him, or that's how he sees himself as. But although Sam and Frodo have such a beautiful friendship, and then his 2 cousins, Pippin, Peregrine Took, and Merryweather. I can't remember Mary's last name, but anyway, and they bring the wizard. They are guided and led by the wizard Gandalf, and they have 2 men, rangers from the future, a ranger, Aragorn, or they call him Strider, and who is the actual king of Gondor, but he's been exiled, and his the son of his father's, of the original king's, his father's steward comes along to Boromir. And then you have Legolas, an elf prince, and Gimli, a dwarf, and I think I said all of them. And it's so and they go on this adventure. They encounter talking trees that are and they encounter other men, the 2, not just Gondor, but also another kingdom, Rohan, who are known as the Horse Lords. There's a slither of romance. There's very little romance in the book. In fact, they focus more on the romance in the movies, because the main big romances are in the appendices in this book. And it's funny, it's humorous. Everybody just loves Samwise Gamgee. How could you not love Sam? And the friendships in this the war, the horrors of war, and good versus evil, and it's so much fun. It is a classic for a reason, and most people of fantasy, love this. Most fantasy readers have read this and love this book. I don't think you have to, I think if you don't want to read it, you don't have to read it. I feel like it's. But this is such a good trilogy, and I'm so proud of myself that I read it, because it is a big boy, and it's long. But I think the fact that it was written in sections really helped, and that and I could picture because I've watched the adaptation so many times. So when I read this, when I physically read it finally for the first time, and listening to the audiobook a couple years ago, I pictured the movie actors. And I heard their voices, and I got, I constantly would be spotting bits of dialogue that they used in the movie screenplay, and this book is, heartbreaking, but it's funny, and, I love what Tolkien did, his language the language of the elves that he created in these 2 kingdoms, and these other the culture of the hobbits, and then, the orcs were really cool and scary, and it's just, it was so much fun, and I already want to reread it. But it's such a long book and such a big commitment, so I have to read other books too. at the same time. And I'm trying to read other tomes, but talking about now, I want to already pick it up and reread it again. That's the problem. I will talk about a book to you guys on my videos, and all of a sudden I want to pick it up and read it again. But it was so good. I just loved it. I mean, it's definitely easier to put in the DVD adaptation and watch that, but this, it's so good. And if you're a fantasy, I mean, it's a big commitment. So if you don't want to commit, then that's fine. Just watch the movie adaptation. You're not gonna, yes, there are a lot more details, and there are things in here that they couldn't put in the movie adaptation, but it's still, and now I hear that they are expanding it. They have the Rings of Power TV show, although a lot of people that are hardcore fans that know this story in and out will tell you that the show is it's not good. Like, it's disrespectful to the original source material, and it doesn't do justice to characters like Galadriel and all. It's just. But I would be kind of curious to watch it myself. Like, I don't know, my friend Terry eventually watched it. She talked about, because she's the story. I always tell the story about how, like, when I was in middle school, I was all about Harry Potter. I was part of that generation that grew up with Harry Potter and everything, and one of the first people who grew up with that book. And while my friend Christina was big on Lord of the Rings, she had a massive crush on Legolas and the actor who played him, Orlando Bloom, the adaptation. So she knew Lord of the Rings. Her room was a shrine to Lord of the Rings. And at the time, I was like, I enjoyed the movies. I thought it was great because it was fantasy, But then it wasn't, and then, I kind of sort of was into it, but not like hardcore into it like Christina was. And then years later, I meet Terry as an adult. And, and of course, I haven't talked to or seen Christina. I mean, I'm friends with her on social media, but I don't interact with her that much. But then I met Terry. Like I said, I met Terry, and it turns out she's also a Lord of the Rings fan. And funnily enough, she likes Legolas' dad, who we meet in The Hobbit. And it's so funny. And I always say it's full circle. And then because of her, because of Terry, I finally bought this book and got 10 times more into Lord of the Rings. And I love this. And like I said, talking about it, I want to read it again. Okay, and then we have. Okay. This is recent biases. But I started a journey on reading Barbara Kingsolver. And I've read 2 of her books now, and I'm going to read Animal Dreams next this summer. But this is Demon Copperhead and is a retelling of David Copperfield. And now, I do agree that you don't necessarily have to read David Copperfield to appreciate and enjoy this book, but it did make it a little, like, for me personally, it made it really cool to be able to see where the similarities to David Copperfield were in the book, like to spot who the characters were and the references and all that. So in this story, we have our main character. They call him a demon, although I think his name is Damon. Actually, his real name, but people call him Demon, and he has this, coppery colored hair. That's why they call him Copperhead. And his mom, he lives in the Appalachian Mountains with his, so they're kind of dirt poor. Him and his mom does drugs, and she's been trying to get off of them for years, but she's addicted. And his mom meets this guy, Stoner, who is a jerk and a bully to Demon, and he enables her. He enables his mom and everything. So eventually his mom ODs and Demon goes into the foster care system. The courts put him in the foster care system. And he's the foster dad is kind of a jerk too, like Stoner. He kind of abuses them, and but Demon, makes friends with these other boys, including this one older kid who's almost, he's a teenager. And eventually Demon, he tries to find his grandmother. And it's about him growing up in this rough neighborhood, this rough world, this rough environment, making friends, meeting these other kids that are also poor like he is, trying to go to school and get an education, and just he grows up and gets involved and follows in the mom footsteps by getting into drugs and getting, or at least surrounded by people that do drugs, and he can't get out of that environment, and he's being around those groups of people, and it's all about him growing up in this environment and trying to survive and trying to live his life and trying to do himself better, but he can't let go of this life, and he constantly feels responsible for the people in his life. And it's a heartbreaking story, but it's so good. And like I said, I think because I think you enjoy the story, unless it just doesn't sound like your kind of story without having read David Copperfield. But it was really kind of cool to see the conversation between David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead and the differences, and because Charles Dickens also, his books are often about things that matter, to issues that matter to him, like in this, and Barbara Kingsolver does the same thing with this book. Takes like in the background of this is the environment, the white trash and the drug scene and the consequences of that, and it was so good, so page turning. I wanted to know how Demon was gonna survive and his relationships, and and his relationship with this one particular girl, and he has been in love with her for a long time, and when he was old enough to feel that kind of feeling, but there was one particular girl he kept going back to, or this girl he kept going back to her. She was part of his life. It's like, one of those unrequited love type, not more on her end than on his end, because he was often distracted by this one particular girl, that, and seeing him, you see him break out of the situation, like you think there's a chance he'll get to have a better life, but then, he's pulled back in every time, and he is so oblivious to that. He does not realize that these people are pulling him back in every time he has a chance to get out and live a better life. He constantly gets involved with the wrong people. He trusts and befriends the wrong people and cares about the wrong people, and has, like, the older boy that he met is one of those people who constantly keeps pulling him back in and screwing up his life, and he sees, and he doesn't realize that this kid is screwing up, as this young man is not good for him and is a bad influence, and he doesn't believe anything. And also, like, he has a chance to be a superstar, be a athletic star, and which that was interesting, because, like, I feel like you see that type of story all the time, where this person doesn't see value in their intelligence. They don't think they're incapable of that intelligence, but they only see themselves as good at that sport, the football, oftentimes, and it's their one thing that they feel confident in, and they're he's so dismissive of being smarter and his own potential. He, like, every time someone tells him that, oh, you're wasting your potential, he gets annoyed with them. He's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And because all he hears about is football, all he knows is he's good at football. That's his dream, to be a football star. And it's so heartbreaking, because on the same time you want to shake him and be like, you are better than this. You're not just an athlete. You are smart. You are very capable. That's all they're saying, is that you are better than this. There's so much out there in the world. I know, like, you just don't see it. And it's just, it's such a heartbreaking story, and such a beautiful story. And like I said, it's in conversation with David Copperfield. And all the, like, the things about Copperfield that, that seemed a little not as bad, because, like, Dickens makes it humorous and a little bit lighthearted and not as intense. It is a lot more intense in this book, because it's a lot grittier and darker of a story than David Copperfield, I think. which I'm due for a reread of that one. But yeah, this is so good. Okay, and then we have, okay, so this is even more recent than the last 3 books I want to talk about. So first we have The Summer Queen by Elizabeth Chadwick. So this is the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine, although it's spelled differently in this time period. She was a young princess who gets, at age 13, gets arranged to marry after her father puts in his will after he dies that she's to marry Louis VII for protection purposes, but that's the last thing she wants. But she goes through it anyway because she's a good daughter and knows, and now that she's responsible for a kingdom and of Aquitaine and protecting Aquitaine, and so she marries King Louis. It's not a great marriage. It starts out really sweet and romantic, but then it goes sour quickly, and they both want to try to get out of that marriage, and it's a marriage that's and it's all about her story starting with that marriage and what she tries to do to protect Aquitaine and the things that she has to do while, being married to Louis and trying to deal with him, and how he slowly gets poisoned against her because he doesn't trust her, and she's so focused on protecting Aquitaine, the rights of Aquitaine, that she doesn't see that he's being slowly influenced against her. And it's a very tragic story, like the story of the Tudor queens, the 6 Tudor queens. And it had similarities. The situation was very similar to it. Like, Louis VII reminded me very much of Henry VIII in a lot of ways. They were both very pious men, although Henry was a little more free with his religion. I mean, in fact, he reformed and got away from the church because of Anne, while Louis VII, who was raised in a church-like environment at an abbey, he gets even more immersed in his religiosity and being even more focused on trying to be good and pure, to the point where he gets disgusted by when they have to sleep together to make a baby. And he thinks she's very sinful and needs to be more pious. In fact, of course, she naturally gets blamed when they can't produce an heir. Because like Anne and Catherine of Aragon, she only produced boys. For at least him. I know historically that she doesn't just have boys. She has, she finally does have a boy later in life. But it's not necessarily Louis's son. And it's, you almost feel bad because they were so sweet in the beginning. And Louis was endearing in the beginning, too. He was somewhat likable, in the beginning. I mean, he was annoying in his persistence and constantly trying to be the perfect, pure, religious, person. But, in his piety, like trying to always be, I have to pray all the time, every second. And, constantly thinking, using the saying, God is punishing us. It's kind of just the same with Henry. Henry believed God was punishing him. And it's, because they don't understand the science behind, making a baby and how that works. And the woman can't control the sex of the baby, doesn't control the sex of the baby. And he felt so bad for her, but she was still such a strong person. She was not weak. She fought tooth and nail to protect herself. She took charge, she was assertive and tried to take charge in the only way she can, but was constantly fighting Louis and in the beginning, fighting his mother at the same time, and fighting his advisor. He was constantly trying to puppeteer Louis because he was a bit naive. And there's a bit of traveling in the book, and not just between Aquitaine and France, but also, they go to the Middle East at one point because he wants to find the Crusades. And it's one of those stories where it's heartbreaking, and you root for Eleanor, and you want her to, you want to see her succeed. You're hoping that Louis doesn't cast her off, But I mean, I know a little bit about the history of it, of her situations. It's one of these things where, you know, it's more about the journey itself and how she gets to where she does get to, and like the details, because of course I haven't read a lot about her. You know, I've listened to a podcast about her, but that's it. But anyway, it was so great, you know, reading this, and I look forward to reading the next two books in this trilogy. Okay, and then we have The Savage Detectives by Robert Bolaño, my first Bolaño. So this was, you know, this was one I actually saw at Books A Million and read the back description. It sounded really interesting, and then it was the podcast Life on Books. Andy, I think his name is. He was a big Bolaño fan. There are two guys, Andy and Tony, who host the channel, and he talked about Bolaño, and it was like, oh yeah, I bought that book. And he was the one who inspired me to actually pick it up and finally read it. And I love this book. This was so good. So this takes place in Mexico, I think, and during a time when poetry was and writers were trying to, you know, it was a writer's revolution, essentially. And it's these two guys, this is this description that's on the back, that these two poets, you know, go on the run and with a stolen car and go on a cross-country trip while being chased. But the book is so much more than that. Like, it's about this movement in time and history, and how poetry has been largely forgotten, and the pretentiousness of these guys, these poets. And they start this group known as the Surrealist Poets, and it's not taken as seriously, and it's just like, it's the journey and other people's reactions to these poets, and how they feel, how they respond to them, and how they don't always some of them don't understand them all the time, and just trying to spread this love of this poetry. And it's multi-perspectives, although some of the perspectives weren't as relevant. I feel like they didn't necessarily, Bolaño didn't need to include them, but, and like the first part is this one particular guy who joins the movement for the first time and becomes part of this group, but he's, you know, and he's kind of ignored by the group, and he's doesn't always, like, he's slowly trying to be part of it and adapt to this group. And then you have the second part is the two poets going on their trip with the stolen car, but it's everyone interacting with them and watching and observing them. And then, you know, and their thoughts on these two guys, and they're different because they basically travel the world, and people, like, they have these brief encounters with different people, like whether other poets or just random people, and how they respond to these guys. And that's probably the longest part, just so you know. And then the last part, we're brought back to the guy from the first part of the book, and them, just as they've left and in the car and trying to escape, these people are chasing them down, these thugs. Or one of the people in the car with them is this woman who is a prostitute, who were, you know, and her pimp is the one that's chasing them, him and his gang, and threatening them. And like that part is basically the beginnings of their journey, and eventually they get separated, and how they eventually all got separated. And it's like so interesting to be in the heads of, you know, to explore this movement and try to understand it, and just trying to, like, and it makes me interested more in poetry. Like, I bought some poetry books after I read this book, or during when I was reading this book, I can't remember. Although I still very much struck with poetry and in understanding it, because it's very metaphorical, and it's not straight, like, explain things. It's symbolic, and it's flowy, and just everything, like, unless you're reading like epic poetry, which is a story just told in a poem format. it's just not everything. It's more about the meaning behind the poem and what it explores, the message and what it explores. And there's not necessarily a story. Sometimes there can be a story, but so it is hard to understand. But it definitely made me intrigued by poetry. And and it's a dark, gritty story. So there's content in there that's like not innocent. There's cursing and there's sex in here, and and it's just, but it's not my usual flair of a story. It's it's surprising. It's kind of, if you know me, it's kind of surprising I would read something like this, but it was really intriguing. I enjoyed reading it. And the last book I'm going to talk about is definitely one I've read really recently. And that, sorry if I'm grossing out with all the noises I'm making, but I'm still getting over a cold, so. I mean, I wish it would have gone away by now, because, but it hasn't yet, so I'm just going to ride it out. Hopefully it'll go away soon. But The Poisonwood Bible is my second Barbara Kingsolver. I remember when this came out, and it was very popular. And this was one of the first Barbara Kingsolver books I read, because I remember hearing about how popular it was, and at the time I was like, I'm not as interested. I mean, like, I attempted it, but I was like, I wasn't feeling it. So I gave my copy back to the Gibbons Bookshop, or the Outpost Bookshop. And then recently, was something inspiring me to check her out again. So this one is, in case by chance you're not one of the people who fell in love with this book, or heard about this book, this is about a family, the Price family. The father, the head of the family, is a minister. It's him and his wife and his 4 daughters. The daughters are, Ruth May is the youngest. She's 6. Then you have Leah, and she's the one who's probably tries to be to follow in her footsteps. Her father's footsteps. She worships her father. And then you have Rachel, who's kind of very vain, spoiled. She loves material things, and she's kind of self-centered, a very prim, proper young lady in the beginning. And then you have Ada, she is a twin to Leah, but when she was in utero, the way she tells her story is that, like, Leah took a lot of the DNA. So Leah is, even though Ada is very intelligent too, like her sister, both of them are extremely smart, Ada was born a cripple, and she wasn't able to speak right away. She walks with a limp, but she's also what I consider wise beyond her years. And the family goes to Africa to convert the African people of this one particular community into Christianity as a mission. And let's just say it does not go well, because they have their own religious beliefs, which are not Christianity. In fact, the leader of these people feels threatened by the father. Nathan's his name. And he's pretty much a zealot. He's very, he believes he's the end all be all. To me, he's like a prophet. He feels like he's a prophet. And like, he doesn't even bother to learn the language, although he does have an interpreter throughout the story, who forms a relationship with Leah later as she gets older. And this family's there for a long time, and it's all about them trying to adapt, in how they're all submissive to Nathan, but at the same time, in their minds, they rebel against him because they see that what he's doing may be a bit too much, that he's crossing some lines and he's not respecting these people. And it's all about him trying to force his beliefs on these people, his Christian beliefs on them, and now they are resistant because they have their own beliefs and their own culture. And he's not even bothering trying to adapt to them, trying to understand them or adapt to them. And again, another book about colonization through religion, through the lens of religion. And it's just, I was so engaged with the story, and it's told from the perspective of the wife and daughters, and being inside their heads was really interesting. I mean, Rachel's was the hardest to be in because she was incredibly frustrating. She was very immature, and even though she was older, she was not as smart as Leah and Anna were. So she'll get words wrong, missay the words, and not understand them. And she has a bit of an attitude problem. At one point, because she's supposedly the prettiest, she's arranged the chief of the these people wants to marry her, and that's the last thing Rachel wants. And then this guy who was there, the guy who brought them there, who physically flew the family there, Axelroot, who's kind of a bit scummy. He has a nice a kinder streak where he offers to pretend to be married, to be Rachel's fiance at one point, so she has to marry him, and she's disgusted by it. But she does come around and start to like him. But it's hard to read her because she's so spoiled, and she's kind of dumb. And so it was hard to be inside of her head. She doesn't have an excuse to being really young and really young like Ruth May, who's a kid. And in fact, I think Ruth May is smarter than Rachel, and a lot, even that's saying a lot, because Ruth May is still 6 years old. She's just a kid. And just, I really was fascinated by being Leah and Ada's heads, because they had some interesting thoughts, especially Ada. Like, she understood things that even the others didn't, because of course Leah was blinded by the fact that she worshipped her father and she wanted to be just like him. And it's slowly she realized that, okay, maybe your father's not always right. Maybe father doesn't always know best. And it was such an engaging story, and seeing these people interact with these people, and the culture clash, and how, learning about each other's cultures and not always understanding each other. Like I said, there's a little bit of romance with Leah and this one guy whose name escapes me, who was the interpreter for the father, and he's also a school teacher. And just seeing these girls react and learn over time that, like I said, father doesn't always know best, that their father's completely crazy, and that he's disrespectful to these people and kind of arrogant. But it was such a good story. I mean, I'm glad I gave it another chance. I loved it. I'm really liking Barbara Kingsolver. I actually almost bought another Barbara Kingsolver book yesterday. I didn't, because I probably could get it cheaper somewhere else, because her book, of course, it's Books a Million where I got it, But it was so good, so page turning. I love the story. I love exploring religion and how there are people that think their religion is always right, and how in colonization, and of course colonization, how these people are trying to, even though it wasn't actually technically colonization, I feel like in a way it relates to it, because it's these people trying to force their white beliefs on these people from a completely different country. these people from Africa who have a completely different culture, like not even like ignoring their culture, and believing that the white Christian culture is the superior culture. It explores that, and it was so much fun to read, and I loved reading this story. And I'm trying to think, I did try to mark some lines. Okay, I didn't. I don't remember on this page, but I did dog ear this page, because obviously there's something on here that I liked. But anyway, it was so good. There are so many great lines on here, and lines in this book that I loved, and I had so much fun reading this, even though it's a kind of a heartbreaking story, and so it's not necessarily always a fun story, but it was enjoyable to read. So those are my favorite books. I hope you all had read some good books so far this year. Or did you guys have any favorites that you want to share with me? Feel free to do so. And I will talk to you all later. All right, bye.